Welcome to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. I am so glad you're here with me today, and I am thrilled to introduce you to my guest. And I'm going to call him a friend. We don't know each other well, but we're going to after this episode. My friend,
Yeah.
Nick Tucker. Nick and I met a few years ago. I think it was 2021.
Yeah, via Zoom
Yeah, via
through
Zoom.
Michelle's workshop.
That's right. It was a storytelling workshop. And I was telling a story about survival. A little story about when I was a kid jumping into the Piscataqua River under the General Sullivan Bridge to catch a rope. And it was amazing because here you were, the storyteller from LA, and you knew the Piscataqua River. You
I
knew where
do.
it was, and you knew how to pronounce it. And that was it. That captured my attention. I thought, I need to know more about this person. And the story you told that day was also about survival. And it was a story about walking across the country from Maine to California as a 23-year-old. And I remember that story. And we're going to talk, maybe, if it comes up, more about that. Nick Tucker is a father and a husband, an inspirational speaker, and he's the founder of a youth adventure camp in Los Angeles. So welcome, Nick. I
Thank
know
you.
I know our listeners are going to be delighted and inspired with our conversation today.
That's my hope.
Anything in your bio that you want our listeners to know, in addition to you being a husband, a father, and a speaker and a founder of this adventure camp?
No, I purposely start off my bio with husband and father because I do believe that's the most important role that I assume in my life. And it was a role, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but it was a role I was really looking forward to throughout my life. And if we're talking about resilience and what pushes us to keep going when things are tough, the idea of having a family one day was really that anchor that I was striving for, that I was moving towards in my life. And we'll put the pieces together as we converse
Yeah,
this morning, but that is always what I like to highlight in my bio
that's
is
wonderful.
husband and father. I will say that the youth adventure camp that I have founded and I run, this is my 10th summer and it is my final summer. So there's
Wow.
some excitement and some mourning around that because over the course of, even though it's my 10th summer, it's my ninth year, but over the course of 9 years, I've watched these kids grow up. Some of them have spent all 9 summers with me from 5 years old to now 15 years old. The core group of campers I had back in 2016 are entering their senior year of high school. So I have a lot of memories with this camp. I started it back in 2016, really as a way to stay connected with this school community. I had worked as a teaching assistant at this school, and it was really as a favor to a family I'm really close with. The mom came to me. Her name is Gina, and she's like, Nick, my son's school, they need a temporary teaching assistant to just fill in until they can hire someone. You work with kids, you're good with kids. How would you feel about hopping in for a couple weeks just to fill the gap? I'm like, of course, 2 weeks, I can do that. I'm trying to do other. I'm trying to write this book. I'm a manny, but I can fill in for a couple weeks. So I go there. A couple weeks turns into few weeks. Few weeks turns into a month and a half. All the while, the principal keeps coming to me and she's like, "We're working on hiring someone. We're working on it. We'll have someone next week. We'll have someone next week." But after a month and a half, I look at her. Her name was Miss Kerr. I say, Miss Kerr, I've been in this classroom for a month and a half now. I know the kids. They know me. I'm just going to finish out the year. Forget about
Wow.
hiring another team. I'll finish out the year. And it works with my schedule. What I learned that year was really something I already knew. One, I don't like to be confined to a classroom. But two, I operate really, really well within community, especially like high school was my jam, college was my jam, because like that's my scene. I can operate within a community. So after the year came and went, I was like, I want to stay connected with that community, but I do not want to be in the classroom. So that summer, I decided to do 2 weeks of a summer program. And I asked my second graders, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this camp for a couple weeks. What should I name it? And they're like, Camp Nick. I'm like, all right, Camp Nick it is. It's simple. It's poignant. I'm Nick. Easy to remember.
That's right.
So I did 2 weeks. I was like, hey, I like this and I can make a living doing this. So I did an extra week. And that was 9 years ago. Um,
That's amazing. And what will become of the camp?
so the sad reality is it's just not viable anymore. So it'll just be over. And I have mixed feelings about it, though I probably won't sit in those feelings till after it's gone. And the reality or the reason is I won't really feel those feelings until that time comes. My wife is always like, "Hey, how do you feel about this?" I'm like, "I don't know yet. I'll tell
That's
you when
right.
I get there."
That's right.
Yeah.
And when we experience it, I went to
Yeah.
summer camp for 11 years. That experience for children to be independent and be their own self is so incredible. To watch that happen, to witness children show up and just be free to be who they really are
Yeah.
is really beautiful. So good for you in bringing
Thank you.
that. 10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about your life, right? And the beautiful life that you live. And that founding that camp was a big part of your beautiful life. So if I were to ask you, how do you define a beautiful life? And what is it about your life that is beautiful I'll say in your opinion?
Yeah, it will be it will be my opinion. And it was funny last night during dinner, my wife made us a couple cocktails and our son was at a friend's house, his first parentless friend date. He watched a movie with his buddy from school and we were just sitting there with Liliana, our 11-month-old, and I toasted and I said, we don't have a perfect life, but we have a good life. And in that moment, what I was feeling, what I was thinking was, we don't have all the money in the world. We're not going on extravagant trips, though we've had our vacations. But we have each other and we have two beautiful children. And at the moment, we have a very functioning relationship, though 7 years is coming up and she keeps on saying, don't get the 7-year itch.
Well,
I'm like, is
listen,
that a thing? People keep on telling me it's a thing. So
it is a thing, I will tell you. But you're in the kind of you're in the thick of it. You have an 11-month-old daughter
yeah,
and a 4-year-old son, right? And
yeah,
and you both work. And
yeah,
so when I look at what makes your life beautiful, it is all that you do and all that you have and all the people that are in it.
yeah.
And you're doing
It's,
important work and work that I'm going to assume, is it safe to assume you love the work you're doing?
I do love the work I'm doing. And, I measure our life on the relationships we have, not just with each other and our children, though those are the highlights of my life. It really is. But we've both built like beautiful communities around us.
Yeah.
I have lifelong friends from childhood, from college and high school, and we stay in touch. And I love them, and I think they love me, or they at least tolerate me. And I do love what I do. I'm at camp during the summer, and sometimes we're riding our bikes. I have like a dozen kids on the Santa Monica boardwalk, and I'm just riding in the sun, and we're going to go down 5 miles down the beach. We're going to swim and just have fun. And I'm like, man, I'm making a living doing this. And even though that's not my future, it is a part of my life. Even when
Yes.
it's going to be my past, it will
That's
always
right.
be a part of my life. And I will always cherish the 9 years I had doing that. And though I'd like to be doing more speaking every time I'm at a school, whether it's assembly or in a classroom, or I just spoke at a foster and adoptive conference for the first time. I love it. I mean, it's nerve-wracking and my pits are sweating and I might be shaking at least for the first minute or two until I gain my footing. But afterwards, every time I'm like, man, the preparation, the nerves, it's all worth it for what happens during and afterwards
That's
when
right.
you're looking at the nodding heads or people come up to you afterwards and like, this spoke to me, and you have a message and you have something you want the audience to get, but every time someone comes up, you learn something new
Let's
about
talk.
what's embedded in your story or your message.
Yeah, let's talk about your speaking and the stories that you're bringing to the world. So, resilience is a big topic of conversation for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
but tell me more about it. Tell me.
It's really evolved. I think as I learn more, I restructure and I try to make my message stick more within my my talk. Now I'm early in my speaking career, so I pretty much deliver a talk,
Yeah.
a talk. And it's really about unprocessed emotions, unprocessed trauma, which is kind of the core of my story and my becoming, and really how I found my way and what helped me find my way. And the more I learn about resilience and how I like this. Someone says it's not just your capacity to bounce back from tough situations, it's really your capacity to be transformed for the better. Because depending on what it is, we're not bouncing back. We're not the same person after we go through something.
We are not.
No, and for me, it was my parents' addiction. It was the loss of my parents during those really formative years, from 18 to 21, both my biological parents, and learning how to deal with the grief, and learning that I didn't deal with the grief, and then trying to weed or find my way through the weeds to do what you would call inner work and what many would call inner work, to just, for lack of a better phrase, to be okay. And I would like to say more than okay, because I didn't want to just be okay. I wanted to have that beautiful life. I wanted to thrive in whatever way I thought that would look. And for me, the anchor that pulled me forward, and which I mentioned to you earlier, was really the desire I had to have a family, to be a husband and to be a father, but to be a good husband and good father. And there was a part of my life where I was just like, man, like if I show up in a relationship or within a marriage with children the way I'm showing up in the world now, it's not going to last very long.
I'm so curious because how does a man grow up to be a good father and a good husband without the role models of good fathers and good husbands?
A lot of it was luck, you could say. My sister and I were very blessed to start at the beginning. I have a younger sister, Kiana. We're just 15 months apart, so we're very close in age. But when I was born, my mother was still using. So both my parents were heroin addicts. So I was born like 2 months premature, like addicted to heroin, and spent some time in the NICU. So when I was released from the NICU, I was released in my mother's care. My mother, her name was Cindy DeSimone, and I was born in Boston. So
Okay.
my mother took me home at like
Yeah.
a month old to Lynn, Massachusetts. And if if most of your listeners are from New England or Massachusetts area, they'll know Lynn, the city of sin. You don't come out the way you went in. And
Oh,
she took me back there, but I was taken by the state of Massachusetts not long after that. And it was just by chance, you could say by divine intervention, that my Nana, who was a snowbird, was trying to get money to my mother and used the local church in Woburn, Massachusetts to try to do that. And that church sent this woman, Lisa Laurian, to give my mother $10. So this would have been 87. So $10 was more back then.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it was more back then. It could get you a bag of groceries, not now. So she was trying to get her $10, and they sent Lisa to my mother's apartment in Lynn, and my mother had just lost me. And Lisa, good Christian woman, was like, okay, don't judge this woman because this could be you. My Lisa, my other mother, she came from an abusive home, a home of alcoholics. Both of her parents were alcoholics. So this was familiar to her. She could tell it was a home of addicts, but she invited my mother to stay with her and her husband, Paul, and their three children. And my mother she doesn't say no to handouts. So
Yeah.
the way Lisa would put it is she went for a weekend and stayed 4 months. So
Wow.
my mother lived with the Laurians for 4 months. And during that time, Lisa and Paul helped her get me back from the state. But when my father got out of prison, my mother and father, they were kind of a toxic combination, and they took to the streets and they left me with the Laurians. So the Laurians became my foster family. And I stayed with them for the first 2.5 years till my mother gave birth to my sister Kiana and turned her life around.
Wow.
And I was 2.5 when I went to live with my mother and my sister, and my father was out of the picture at that point in the sense where he wasn't in the home, though
Yeah.
we saw him and we had a relationship with him. So I my mother maintained contact with the Laurians, and I would go for visits, and they had moved to North Berwick, Maine, which is not far from
That's right.
Wells,
That's right.
at a town of 4,000. So it's a small town, kind of like the town you live in now. And I used to go up to Maine and visit them, and I loved Maine. And it was a small, 100-year-old colonial that needed a lot of work.
Like
And
the house I'm in now.
yeah, by then, my Lisa and Paul had their fourth, my little brother Dan. So that there were six of them in this 950 square foot
Wow.
colonial. And I would go up and visit them, and we'd run around feral, and it was great. So, but in the meantime, my mother was diagnosed with AIDS and she got really sick. And after 6 years of being clean, she relapsed. And I was think I was around 7 or 8. And I talk about this in the story I tell to kids,
Yeah.
not only high school students, but conference attendees and kids in college. But to make a long story short, we ended up, my sister and I, with the Laurians in Maine, and we bounced back and forth for a few years there. But eventually, come sixth grade, we were with them indefinitely. So when it comes to male role models, I didn't consistently have my father. I at least didn't have him in the home. I'd visit him. He had some relationships after my mother, and my sister and I would stay with him and his girlfriends at the time. And I would pick up things from my father. My father was very loving. He was warm, and he was definitely an authoritative figure. And I think I kind of fathered that way. But more so, Paul was my father since I was weeks old. He was a consistent father figure in my life. And Paul was always a very principled man. So I learned to, I guess, stand on what you believe in. And, we maybe didn't agree growing up because, he kind of came from a fundamentalist Christian background. So we were not allowed to watch witchcraft in the house. So we couldn't watch Harry Potter.
Yeah.
We couldn't celebrate Halloween. I'm not that strict, but he was consistent.
Yeah.
He was consistent. We got a longer leash as we got older, but at least when we were kids, there was, I definitely learned to take what you believe and set those boundaries. And I'm trying to do that with our kids right now because I definitely had a hard time doing that throughout my adolescence, throughout my early 20s. It's a part of me that I've had to develop, being able to stand on my principles and to set boundaries and to stick to them.
We talk a lot about inner work as the beautiful work, and setting boundaries is one of the types of beautiful work, right?
Yeah.
Setting boundaries, getting clear about your values, knowing yourself and what you need to thrive. Like all of that is in the category of inner work, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people think that inner work means you have to be a meditator and do all the things. No,
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of
that,
has a new age connotation to it, I think, when
yeah.
people think about it.
That's right. It really does. And I also think that there's so much pressure to have this inner work that is perfect and precise, but inner work is messy.
Yeah.
At least the inner work that I do. One day I'm spot
Yeah.
on with my boundaries and another day I am wobbly as heck. So
Yeah.
so I do think that, having the role model that you had and having the contrast, if you will, of two different families really gave you clarity on what you wanted for your own life as you came into adulthood.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting statement. I've heard this before, and I don't know how true it is. Your listeners can fact check, but I heard that most people who abuse were abused, but most people who were abused don't abuse.
Mm,
So there's this truth there that a lot of people who are abused they know how it feels, and they wouldn't want to inflict that on anybody else. So I had some feelings about my father not being around. It wasn't feelings of resent. I wasn't angry, if you were, though not not consciously. I think there was a lot of anger boiling under the surface, but I think that was other feelings manifesting as anger. And we can
yeah.
talk about that
Yeah.
if the conversation goes there.
Yeah.
But what I did know is that I wanted to be there for my kids.
Yeah.
And maybe having Paul there helped solidify that for me, whether it be subconsciously or consciously or whatever. But I knew I wanted to be there for my kids.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I could measure it, what percentage that would be, how much my father not being there influenced that desire, how much Paul being there influenced that desire, but I wanted it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so curious because so grew up, I think you said sixth grade, eighth grade, I'm not sure, sixth grade,
Sixth grade. Yeah.
in Berwick, Maine.
Yeah.
Graduated from Noble High School,
Noble High School.
and then went to college in Maine.
I did.
And it was after college that you decided to walk across the country with your friend Sam
Yeah. Yeah.
all the way to California.
Oh, that was my first introduction to California. Yeah.
And I was struck with the words spiritual pilgrimage on your website,
Yeah.
right? You use those words, and I'm going to be 63 at my next birthday,
Oh,
and I am longing for a spiritual pilgrimage. But to me, again, talk about the way that we use language or the way that we perceive, the meaning of language. I think of a spiritual pilgrimage as something that you have to be ready for, or that is this big trip. Don't get me wrong, Nick.
yeah.
Walking across the country from Maine to California, that was a big trip. But
Yeah.
when you started off the walk, you did not intend for it to be a spiritual pilgrimage, did you?
Not consciously. I would not have used those words at 23 years old.
So tell me about it. Tell me what now, looking back on it, was the spiritual pilgrimage in that trip.
I mean, how much time you got? So I'm 37 now. We ended at when I was 24. So it's been 13 years since Sam and I finished the walk. And I've had a lot of years to reflect on the walk, what it meant to me at 23. The, I think the question many people have is why. So you may find this interesting. The talk I give the students right now is answering that question, why, or at least bringing the kids along that journey to show them why I ended up walking across the country. Because I think if you would have asked me at 23, why are you doing this? First of all, I probably wouldn't have been able to give you a clear answer, but I probably would have told you something like, it sounds fun, right? Because it sounded fun. It sounded like an adventure. And I was definitely one of those kids who sought out adventure. But even at 23, I knew it went a little bit deeper than that because there was this element to the walk, or at least the decision to do the walk, that I couldn't really explain. It was like it was speaking to me. So a little context. I took a semester off at Colby College. So I went to college in Maine, as you already told your listeners, up at Colby in Waterville. And I took a semester off because I injured my knee playing football. And I injured it early enough in the season where if I redshirted, I could come back for another season and finish my eligibility. So I did that. So I ended up graduating instead of May of 2010 in December of 2010. So I come home to North Berwick, Maine, and Lisa greets me, congratulates me. But I think within a few hours, she hands me a book she read. And Lisa's an avid reader, loves to read. I think I think it was kind of her form of escape when she was growing up with parents who
Yeah.
were abusive alcoholics. So she would read. And I always admired how much she read because I did not love reading. I picked up a love for reading in college uh, because I was really interested in a girl who loved reading. See, a lot of times with us young men, it doesn't go that deep. Yeah. But she handed me this book called The Walk, and it's a piece of fiction by this author, Richard Paul Evans. And the premise is this guy goes through a tremendous amount of loss and decides that he's just going to walk as far as he could. And because within the 3 or 4 years of reading this book, I'd lost my mom, my biological mother, my biological father, and I'd walked through that loss. I was still walking through it in the moment. I identified with the protagonist in the story. And in the story, he's like, I'm going to walk as far as I can. and he was from Seattle, Washington. So it was Key West, Florida. And here I am in the furthest Northeast state in the continental US. I'm like, where's the furthest I could walk? Southern California, right? And it was just like a fun idea that was inspired by a book I was reading. Anyone who reads, especially fiction, you you're reading and then you just put it down for a minute and you're just reflecting on whatever you just read. And sometimes it inspires thought, and that thought begets another thought, and all of a sudden you have to like reread what you just read because you're somewhere else. But that's what this moment was. But I was waiting on some things that I had applied for. I had applied for this fellowship that would have brought me overseas for a whole year to conduct a project that I proposed myself. It was called the Watson Fellowship. And given my history with AIDS, because my mother and father, they passed from AIDS, I wanted to go to 3 countries. They all had populations who spoke Portuguese. And I was just going to study the language, and at least I could operate within one language. And they all had AIDS epidemics, or at least large population with people who suffered from AIDS. And I wanted to see how the children of these people were faring. Anyway, my professors, I was a finalist for it, and my professors were confident that I was going to get it. I had the personal story, blah, blah, blah. But March of 2011 rolls around and I don't get it. But that thought of walking across the country never left me. Fast forward, don't get the fellowship. I call Sam immediately because I know that I'm going to walk across the country. I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this. And he's like, all right, I'm going to do this too. He didn't consult his girlfriend at the time, which was a mistake. But over months, we thought of like an initiative and what we wanted to be, what we wanted the walk to be about, what we wanted to accomplish, what it would take financially to make it from Maine to California.
It's fascinating. I'm so
Yeah.
curious when you think about deciding, what the purpose of the walk, what you wanted to accomplish during the walk, on the walk. Like, what did you come up with?
So when I was looking back to where I was at that moment, I had graduated college. In college, I drank a lot. Not, I wasn't the guy drinking throughout the week, not making it to class. I was functional, but I was what you would call a weekend warrior.
Yeah.
And I was making some really, really bad decisions, risky decisions. I was being very promiscuous. I was being violent. And I wasn't remembering a lot of this. So senior year, I had written out my story.
Mm-hmm.
It was a school project. And I legit thought it was just some easy credit. But in writing out my story, I basically laid out all my trauma on a Word
On the
doc.
page. Oh,
And it ended up being super cathartic, therapeutic, and ultimately eye-opening. And I just sat there January of my senior year, having written out my story, like, oh my God, like, oh my God. Like, I didn't call it trauma back then. I didn't know it
right.
as trauma. I was just like, I've been through some stuff and I have developed some really strong protection mechanisms that are wreaking some havoc on my life. I was pretty disconnected. I was stoic. I had no what we call interoception, which is just your ability to name your emotions,
Yeah.
name them, claim them, communicate them. I didn't have that ability. And
And you probably didn't think you needed them.
no, I didn't know. I had no
Right.
idea.
Right.
But after writing out my story, I couldn't deny it. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I have all this stuff that I have not attended to. And
Yeah.
it's really manifesting itself in destructive ways. So I walked away from that knowing I needed to do some work. But, when we talk about inner work, there is this new age idea that it's meditation, it's this and that. I didn't know this would have been 22 years old. I didn't know it at 22 years old, but I knew I needed to change some things.
Yeah.
And
To get honest with yourself.
yeah, and I think that just hovered over me for some time. I was still in college for another almost year, and I was still, I think, walking in ways that were antithetical to the person I wanted to be, even with this newfound awakening.
Yeah.
It's not like you change overnight. So looking back at the walk, when college was over, I was ready to change, and I didn't necessarily know how I was going to. But we decided what we wanted to do for the walk was not walk for any specific cause. We just wanted to do random acts of kindness and be, I think, of service any way we could. Kind of leave it open to serendipity, to chance, to a heart posture of servitude. And that's how we wanted to approach the walk. And I think in my subconscious, at least this is what I attribute it to at 37, I think in the deep recesses of my being, I thought if I just did a lot of good, it would help make me the person I wanted to be.
Mm.
And it's not like parts of me didn't operate like that. You know, I was a very likable person. I got along with everybody. I had these moments of intense compassion, and I could sit and listen to anyone's problems, and I would love to help when I could, but it was just so overshadowed by the drinking and the sex and the occasional violence, at least within me, that I didn't see myself
Mm.
that way. You know, years later, there was this female friend I had who's a year older than me. She was at Kobe. And I had these moments when I was blackout drunk where I was violent even towards females. And it's not something I'm proud of, but it's the truth. And it's not something I ever imagined myself doing. But I think you mix a little unattended trauma and substance, and a lot of people do things outside of their character.
Yeah.
But I asked my friend, I was like, so after all this, why did you remain friends with me? And she said something that stuck with me to this moment. She's like, you had a lot of redeeming qualities. And I've always believed that about everybody. Wouldn't have put it that way. I would usually say, yeah, there's good in everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that is a outgrowth of growing up with parents who suffered from addiction. Like my mother wasn't just a heroin addict. My father wasn't just a heroin addict. They weren't just people who had AIDS. They were more than that. You know, they were my parents. My mother was a good cook. She was loving. Had a huge personality. She overreacted sometimes.
Yes.
She was very protective over Kiana and I. A lot of that given her history with drugs and being on the streets and seeing really, I think, the depths of human depravity and evil and what people are capable of.
Yeah.
And I knew that about people, and I still know that about people. And I needed to know that about me, though.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because so much of work in coaching, the work that I do, is really helping people make peace with all of their parts.
Yeah.
You know, I like to say the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'm a
Mm-hmm.
messy mix of all of them. And your story is so incredible because it's true. Now we have the words to put to this work that we're doing, right? We have
Yeah.
the words to talk about trauma, big T or little t, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We carry this recipe for disaster within us.
Yep.
And it's not until we start to get clear and honest and own the messy mix that we are that we can begin to solve the dilemma of who am I? Who do I want to be? And what parts of me are interfering with who I want to be?
That's
So,
beautifully put. Yeah.
so it's, when I imagine this walk of servitude, it is a pilgrimage across the country,
Yeah.
leading people and doing good without, I'm going to say, an ulterior motive, just for the purpose of doing good and giving yourself some time and space to sort out your shit,
Yeah. We
right?
were sorting. And there was a fun part of it, an
Yeah.
adventurous part of it, a longing for the unknown, like a whole country full of people, full of experiences that we're about to walk through, pun intended.
Yeah.
And there was even a thought of what it could lead to after the walk. And playing around with those fantasies, if you will, in my head was fun. It gave me a little buzz. And that also was maybe a little bit more of a shallow part of the walk, but definitely a part of the walk that appealed to at least me. I can't speak for Sam. But I want to dig a little bit on inner
Yeah.
work, because one thing I struggle with when I'm talking to audiences, especially parents of foster youth or kids who have gone through some trauma, is, they want answers. They want concrete tools. They want to know what inner work I did
Yeah.
to come out the other side well adjusted. So I always have a hard time naming it, because I think I'm stuck in that mindset. Well, inner work looks like meditation, journaling every day, da 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 da. And these are all tools, and these are things I would put on a platter and be like, "Here, pick from the pick from the pool of tools that can help you But what did I do? I stumbled upon writing out my story by happenstance, right?
Yes.
But it's a real tool. Therapists will use this. They'll say, write about these experiences because it allows you to zoom out.
Yeah.
And you all of a sudden become a spectator of experiences that you went through, but maybe haven't thought about or reflected on. And that's useful. And again, I was lucky enough to just stumble upon it. Like, thank God. But after, what did I do? Because I didn't go to therapy.
Okay.
What does inner work look like? And I've been trying to put my finger on it. And maybe you said things here and there that have kind of just like clicked. One thing, it's deciding on who you want to be. But what is that? That's drawing attention and focus to, I think, how you're operating in the world.
That's right. The being intentional.
Yeah, intentional. And constantly bringing your mind or your focus back to being intentional. Is that inner work? I mean, what would you say?
I would say yes, it is. I mean, it's so interesting because, I've never been to therapy either. And God knows there's a lot a therapist could hear from me.
Yeah,
However, when I think about getting to know yourself, that's a big umbrella.
yeah,
How do you get to know yourself? Because it's in knowing yourself that you discover the inner work that needs to be done. And
man. No, that's another question. How do you get to know yourself?
um, okay, Nick, here we go.
No, I have an idea, but I want to hear what
Yeah.
you'd say.
My favorite way to get to know yourself is to start bringing your awareness to how you feel. Because knowing yourself, for me, what has helped me the most in knowing myself, it's not thinking and it's not reading. It's not a recipe that someone else tells me to do XYZ. It's focusing on how does it feel physically, and I'm going to use the word energetically.
Yeah,
How do I know when I'm thriving? How do I know when I'm lit up?
yeah,
How do I know when I'm not lit up?
right.
And what are the actions, right? What's the interference? What are my choices that are causing me to be too far from the middle? Either so lit up that I'm high or
Yeah,
so not lit up that I'm depressed.
yeah,
And looking, it's self-awareness for me. It's am I thriving? Can I feel energized? Because when I
yeah.
know how I want to feel, I know if I'm on the right track.
Self-awareness, that's a key word. Are you familiar with Bessel van der Kolk, I think his name is?
No, tell me more.
I might attribute a title to him that someone else may have, but I'm just going to give it to him. I see him as kind of like the father of trauma-informed care therapy. So he has this famous book called The Body Keeps the Score,
Oh, yes.
and he worked with like Vietnam vets and people severely traumatized people with PTSD. And he was really taking the lid off of how trauma imprints itself on the body,
Absolutely.
right? So when we talk about self-awareness in his book and in my experience, he said that you cannot make any changes, especially big, meaningful changes in your life, if you don't first have self-awareness. And that technically makes sense. Like, how do you change what you don't know how to change? Or if you don't know there's a problem. So to rewind a little bit, writing out my story, what it did is it gave me a tremendous amount of self-awareness that I did not have. That's how
That's
I
right.
knew. That's how I knew I needed to make changes because I could pinpoint the behavior patterns that were, to use your word, interfering with the person I wanted to be and the future I wanted to have.
Yes. And self-awareness is no small act. I mean,
No.
because you have to be willing to feel your emotions.
Hmm.
You have to be willing to look at the dark side, right? Your shadow side, the
Yeah.
ugly and messy, the less than perfect. And
Hmm.
we live in a world that rewards us for perfection. From the time we're in kindergarten or even younger now, right through, we are rewarded heavily for performing and being perfect. And so that self-awareness, it might sound easy to, just increase your self-awareness. That's where the inner work starts. But you really have to make peace with our human ability to feel this huge range of feelings.
Hmm.
right? It's not that we want to always, at least in my book, that we don't want to be positive all the time, because there's a whole other world of feelings that need to be processed through our bodies so that we don't store them in our bodies.
Yeah. People also think you're fake if you're positive
Of course,
all the
right?
time.
Right?
Part of I don't think we can separate off self-awareness from how we are showing up in social situations with people in our lives. I
Yeah.
think, because that's how we all walk through this world, most of us.
Yeah.
But we all walk through this world in relationship
With
to
others.
other people.
Absolutely.
Our feelings usually manifest in relationships with other people, whether positive or negative. So I think there's also this idea of self-work being something you do alone or isolated.
Yeah. Thinking about inner work, my list of inner work practices, it might be cooking. There are days where that is meditation, cooking as meditation. It might be walking as meditation. It might
Driving.
driving, right?
Yeah.
Driving in silence. I mean, I think that is one of the things that we try to do on this podcast is introduce our listeners to a whole host of things that are considered inner work, so that each of us can find what works for us, because we're all so unique, and
Yeah.
what works for us now might not be what works for us 10 years from now.
That's very true. Number one, what works for you 10 years ago might not work for you
That's right.
now, but there's another element. It's what works for us and the people around us. One thing I'm very weary of is idolizing self-work,
Mm-hmm.
idolizing my peace,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. Like, I don't want to be stuck in a perpetual spiral of being inwardly focused all the time, where I can't operate in social spaces
Oh,
with other people,
absolutely.
friends, spouses, children. That's a quick path to narcissism. So what I've learned is I needed some alone time to really do some digging to try to figure out who I was with this new self-awareness, what I needed to change the life I want. Some of that, sometimes you do need to get away, and you do need to get out of your father's house if you need an Abraham moment, to get away from the familiar, just to gather yourself. But it's always meant to be temporary, because we have to come back into social
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah. One of the things I think about is the reason that inner work is so important is so that you can contribute at a higher level in your relationships and in your community, right?
Yeah.
Your contribution to the world, because I really do believe we come to this earth, we come into our bodies with huge ability to impact the lives of others in a positive way,
Yeah.
to contribute to the world that we live in, to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't have any alone time and we don't have the self-awareness, our contribution isn't as deep as it could be.
Yeah.
It's not as big as it could be. And so, I think it's really important to know, like, the reason that we do inner work is so that we are a better human on the planet.
Yeah.
Not so I feel better about myself.
Right. No. There
So,
is that outwardly looking component
yes,
to
yeah.
inner work.
Yeah. So I have to ask, was there a turning point or a specific event or a series of events that brought you to a place where you were willing to begin inner work, willing to feel your feelings, willing to learn how to communicate?
I've talked about writing out my story. That
Yeah.
was the turning point,
Okay, great.
because I just didn't know before
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
but after writing out my story, it made sense. So at the beginning of college, I had a girlfriend, and, I did the best I could. She did the best she could in our limited human capacity.
Yeah.
But right before college, I had lost my mom. And again, I had walked through over a decade with my mom suffering from addiction and AIDS. And all of that was in me. And it wasn't just my past story. Like, the effects of that were living in me. I didn't know. But one of the effects was I had a real hard time within this romantic relationship connecting on an emotional level. Not shutting down when things got emotionally intense. And, I was always somebody who could step up in intense situations. But when it came to emotional intensity directed at me because it was something I did, I just kind of shut down,
Yeah.
at least within romantic relationships. And that was really frustrating for her, which made it really frustrating for me.
Of course.
Anyway, there were signs.
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. So all that made a lot more sense when I wrote out my story and I became self-aware.
And do you,
Self-aware.
right? We
Yeah.
need that word, but that whole
Yeah. Yeah.
self-awareness movement just feels like um, maybe it's the enlightened. Like I don't like to think about it being
Yeah,
that we have achieved a certain level of being. I think about
no.
the self-awareness as a daily practice.
It is because it changes. You evolve,
Yeah,
and you have different relationships with different people that reveal different elements of yourself.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's always changing. But at that moment,
yeah,
I knew I needed to like feel my stuff,
yeah.
and being stoic and suppressing emotions just wasn't working
So
for me. And that was the moment. It was over the course of like a week and a half, but it was the turning point.
So, what did you do in addition to the walk? Because I know the walk, you sorted through a lot of stuff, but what were some of the practices that you began to safely and slowly engage in order to, make sense of your stuff and to be able to learn how to feel your emotions and express your emotions?
I think I'm still doing it.
Yeah.
I'm
Good.
much better. So I didn't have a list of practices
Yeah.
to pull from. I wasn't intentional in that manner. I think what happened was spend a lot of time in church.
Okay.
So there's a spiritual element here. What does that mean technically? How could people where church isn't their thing, or what would be the equivalent? So for me, it was a compass, right? It was a standard to work towards. So, Jesus,
Yeah.
kind,
Yeah.
compassionate, principled, that's someone to emulate.
Yes.
You could blow the lid off and swim in your self-awareness, but if you don't know who you want to be, it's moot
Yeah.
because you don't have a direction ahead. And the other thing which I've spoke about already is just knowing that I wanted a family and I wanted to be the type of person that could sustain a family.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
being faithful, so
Right?
getting control of my promiscuity, right? Not drinking to the point of being blackout.
Yeah.
Luckily, it ended up just being kind of a college phase.
Yeah.
And I was able to walk away from that without too much consternation. But
Yeah.
that's not everybody. And there was a part of me that was worried because my mother being an addict, me being the child of addicts, was always like, you're predisposed. You can't experiment. Like it was one of her biggest worries. Luckily, I mean, I hate to use the word luckily, but she had passed before she saw the unraveling because that would have been her nightmare. But I just wanted to be a force for good in this world. If
Yeah.
we go back to what you were
Yeah.
saying about being better humans,
Yeah.
like I didn't
And
want to be
then
destructive.
what is something, or if there was one thing that you would tell our listeners that you want our listeners to know about doing their work, what would it be?
You don't have to make it something so mystical or esoteric or out there. Like most of the inner work you do, provided you haven't gone through some profound trauma, most of the work you do is within the relationships you have in your life, whether it's your parents or siblings or whomever, right? I wasn't going to learn how to communicate my feelings until I was put in a position where I needed to communicate my feelings.
Yeah.
My wife, she knows my history. In fact, I read her my warning label before I asked her out on our first date, right? I told her I had a crush on her, then I told her all the reasons she should probably run the other way. And at that point, I was like 29, 30. Um, but luckily, we were already friends, so because I don't recommend that. But up until I had a relationship with her, I didn't have to practice sharing my feelings at a level that would sustain a romantic relationship because I just didn't have the opportunity. I wasn't in those type of relationships. I wasn't forced to. I knew I struggled in the area. I knew I struggled with processing, naming, and communicating emotions. At that point in my life, I'd been aware of that for the better part of a decade. So I was much better at
Yeah.
naming feelings, but I still needed to learn how to communicate them. My wife knows this about me. If my wife and I get in a fight, she knows that we'll talk about it in the moment. And I'm the type of person who don't go to bed angry. I want to figure it out now. She's the type of person she'll walk away.
Yep.
I'm like, no, we'll get there. Like, let's push through it. We'll get as far as we can. Usually I can push her to as far as we can go in that moment and we'll have some sort of resolution. However, she also knows that I need at least 24 hours to ruminate and process. And I'm going to come back to her and we're going to pick up the conversation, even if it seemingly had come to an end in a resolution. I'm coming back 24 hours later because I've processed it more. There's a
Yeah.
little delay. Some of that may be trauma and past emotional suppression, and that's just the internal habit I've developed. Part of it is probably because I'm a typical guy and we just need a day or two. We'll come back. I don't know what it is at this point. It's not that important. It's what I need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is such a beautiful the question of what would you tell our listeners who about doing the inner work. What I heard you saying is find an approach that works for you. Make sure the person that you're in the relationship with understands your approach. Know what you
Yeah.
need and make sure the other person understands what you know that you need and the process that you need to go through.
Yeah.
Because it always breaks down when we don't know what works for us, when we don't know what we need, and then
Yeah.
someone else doesn't know, and it's a disaster. But knowing what you need and being able to make sure that others who you're in relationship with and working through these things with
Yeah.
know also. You can know yourself till the cows come home.
Yeah.
But if you don't tell others who you are and what you need,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
I remember this quote from the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
Actually, I took notes about poignant things that I wanted to
Yeah.
remember. And I remember in the book, he was talking about people who are deeply traumatized, war veterans, people who were abused, severely abused, neglected sexually, physically, the whole gambit. And they, in the book, emphasized the importance of having somebody walk with you while you're doing the work. He didn't use those words, but
Yeah.
that's essentially what he meant. But the words he did use is somebody who's able to tolerate your terror. Because for some
Absolutely.
people who haven't attended to unattended trauma, who have gone through some really deep and dark things, you need somebody there who can hold your terror with you. Let's do small t. When I moved out to LA at 25, I was still in the mindset that inner work and overcoming your issues was something you did. I don't want to say in isolation, but I almost felt like it's something you do alone and then you come back, you have
You do it
friends.
in secret.
Right.
And then
You
you
do it in
come back.
secret. And you probably need to deal with your issues before you engage in romantic relationships, right?
Yeah.
Be perfect.
Yeah.
I didn't think perfect, but in essence, maybe this is social. But what this girl said to me, she was a college friend. She also lived in LA at the time with her boyfriend, now husband. And she had lost her sister to a car accident while in college. And I remember we were all at the beach and I was like, yeah. And I wasn't talking to her. I was just, this is a plural you. I was like, yeah, you really need to deal with the issues before you get in romantic relationships because that was what I thought I needed to do. And she's like, well, no. He was like, you could definitely walk through any issues or trauma with somebody you love because that's what she was doing. And I was like, that completely reconfigured how I thought about trauma, doing self-work and doing it in relation to the relationships you have in your life and whether you're ready or not to have a girlfriend or boyfriend or a spouse or you need somebody there who can support you in your journey and vice versa. You both are just kind of working through your messes together. Granted, there are some people who probably need to do some work before they engage in another relationship. But that's if that behavior is directly interfering with their relationships, you probably need to take care of that, or else you need to find someone with a lot of patience and grace.
Those people with patience and grace do exist if that's
Yeah.
what you need. I have to say, I believe wholeheartedly that the purpose of a lifetime is to continue to learn.
Yeah.
And every experience and every relationship is a teacher if we allow them to be.
Yeah.
And so, I often say my children were some of my biggest teachers. And Nick, as a parent of young children, you may be saying the same thing.
It's taught me I need to do a lot more work than I thought.
But you learn through experience. The lived experience teaches us whatever experience it is, whether it's walking across the country or having a newborn, we're different after the experience.
Yeah.
And when we can look at every experience as a lesson in and of itself and who we are becoming because of that experience, it changes the rules of I must do this before I'm ready for something,
That's
right?
beautiful.
And that's what I think about,
Becoming.
right? Yeah, it's because our life is a series of lessons to just, promote our becoming.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to tell you, and I think about this a lot, is, when we talk about not being able to communicate or not wanting to feel the feelings that we need to communicate, there's a brilliant practice, and I do it all the time. And I often tell my clients to take this practice up when they need it. I call it rage writing. Putting the words on the paper and
Yeah.
getting them energetically out of your brain and out of your body. Just getting the words on paper. And you said yourself, writing your story, was a turning point.
It was a spiritual exercise. It was an
Yes.
energetic exercise. I mean, I pretty much
Yes.
cried through the whole thing.
Yes.
And then I reread it over the course of a couple years, several times, and I would, cry. But it is like releasing something.
It
I could
is.
read it now, talk about it now. Sometimes I'll tear up, sometimes I won't, but it doesn't pull out of me the same response or the same energetic or spiritual response that it once did because it is like a release.
It is a release because you are storing all of that emotion and energy in your tissue, in your body, and getting it out allows you not to carry it in your body.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking what, and we're going to wrap up soon because I could talk to you all
Oh
day.
yeah.
I could talk to you. What would you tell someone who is being nudged? I say that this is my term, nudged by the universe toward inner work. What would you tell them?
Do you ask this to all your guests?
No, not all of them.
Okay.
Sometimes we don't even get to it. There's no right answer.
No, there's not, but it is a big question. If you're being nudged by the universe, I might say a spiritual pulling or divine intervention. I'm always saying you have to listen to that inner voice. Like, because if we're talking about a nudge by the universe, I think what we're talking about is we're talking about a deep feeling that's not leaving you. You might not even be able to name that feeling, but there's a pull
There's
and
a
you
pull.
know you need to do something. Sometimes you know that something, sometimes you know the direction, but it doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't go away unless you tend to it. That was the walk for me, right? It was just this feeling, deep feeling, thought feeling. I mean, they're married. It
Yeah,
just didn't go away. And there was a part of me that was like, this is what I need to be doing right now. In your words, it was the universe pulling me. And I believe sometimes you can have that towards inner work, though it might not be processed by your being or your brain that way as being pulled towards inner work. But how you're probably digesting it is, man, there's something not right in my life and I need to do something.
absolutely.
And it's vague and you don't know which direction to go, but there's a knowing.
Yeah,
There's a deep knowing. And it's our job to figure out what that is, right? You talk about becoming. What's beautiful having a podcast, speaking to audiences is you have revelations. So I'm giving the same talk in essence. I'm telling the same story, but the ending keeps evolving, keeps changing. The last time I told my story, it was a beautiful opportunity to speak to foster and adoptive parents who are my people. That was Lisa and Paul to me, and I have a tremendous amount of love for that population. So I was really excited to tell my story to those parents and professionals. And I love the way conferences kind of lift me up as a lived experience expert because I'll take the expert all day,
that's
all
right.
day. But in constructing and tweaking my talk for that particular audience who aren't 16 to 18-year-old kids, I landed on this idea that we never stop becoming. The walk was a part of my becoming. And I told the audience this. I said, and I do this, this is true. Every night I lie in bed with Kenzo and he likes to do songs and he loves worship songs. And then if he doesn't fall asleep during the songs, we pray. We usually start with some gratitude, some form of, thank you for the day, thank you for love, thank you for family, so on and so forth. And then I'm very intentional about him hearing me kind of pull back a little bit and me praying or asking God to help me be a better father and a better husband. And I do that because number one, I want him to know I am not perfect, which I'm sure he knows, even though he might not feel it or know it. And also that we never stop becoming.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want him to feel like he has to be perfect or that he's ever arrived or that my wife, Caitlin, and I expect that of him. But I want him to know life is a lifelong journey, however long you're graced to be on this earth. And as you say, we never stop learning. We never stop becoming. We never stop engaging with life, with others. I think it's a beautiful way to approach life. And I think if you could shift your mindset to look at life in that way, that there's a lesson in everything, it makes the hard times more tolerable. And
Yes.
it's also more tolerable if you can do it in relationship with others.
Yes. And you talk a lot about the relationship with others. And I really think that the foundation of having good relationships with others is having a good relationship with self.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't be in relationship with others if you have unfinished business with your relationship with yourself.
Yeah. At least you can be in a relationship with others, but it's going to be hard.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
going to be
That's
difficult.
right. And then thinking about, the becomingness and living a life in which you're becoming and you're changing and you're growing and you're learning. When I started to take that mindset of not I was no longer searching for mastering a certain thing, being an expert in something. It
Yeah.
was I'm forever a student and things are happening in my life that are great teaching moments. It really changed the way that I lived my life.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a much gentler, kinder, more self compassion if I'm allowing myself to become. And
Yeah.
hopefully I'll have 100 years, that I can continue to learn and grow. I'm so glad we talked about kind of this esoteric perception of what inner work is and how that really your life experience brings you plenty of opportunities to do the work that needs to be done. And, going back to the question about nudges from the universe, that longing, that knowing that even if you just know something isn't quite right, you don't have to know what it is.
Yeah.
It just gives you an invitation to continue to be curious and learn more about yourself and the world around you.
Yeah. The
So
unfortunate and fortunate truth is uh, life will let you know what you need to work on.
that's right.
And for many of men, I'll speak about my species, we are stubborn. And a lot of us have to hit rock bottom before we're willing to do the work. Not all, many.
And
Um,
I want to say, in my experience, it's not just men who
yeah, no,
sometimes.
it's not
No,
just
it
men.
is not just men.
No.
I have a podcast called Nudges from the Universe. It was in our first season, and my experience with Nudges from the Universe is that what starts off as a little nudge grows into a big kick in the pants if you
Yeah.
don't listen. And
Yeah. You want
so
to get it before you're getting kicked.
right?
Yeah.
But the universe really does, whether it's divine intervention or a greater being that knows that we are meant for more, that is our guide. And so being brave and courageous and willing and open to moving in the direction that the universe is guiding you or God is
Yeah. I
guiding
mean,
you.
depending on what you believe, there is seemingly an order to this world, to us, to everything. And I think one of the things that points to that order is when you are operating outside of, for lack of a better way of putting it, what's intended,
Yes.
life kicks you,
Oh, yeah.
right? And we're human, so we're all going to walk outside of intention, outside the order. And life usually, as I said, lets us
Let
know.
us know.
For
That's
me,
right.
for me, it ended up being like depression, getting blackout drunk, becoming violent. You know the uh, the threat of just deteriorating relationships, the world, the life was letting me know that I was out of order.
Right. And you were
Yeah,
not following the path to bring your highest and best self to the world. So,
yeah,
with that, Nick, I'm going to say that we've covered so much. And it has been really, really fun to learn more about your story and your approach to inner work and the work that you're doing. Before we wrap up, tell our listeners how they can find you, how they can follow you, and the work that you're doing with this, your Walk With Me tour.
Yes, yes. So the Walk With Me tour is this vision I have of retracing the path that Sam and I took from Maine to California and speaking at schools, colleges, and churches, talking to audiences really about this idea of becoming. But more than that, we didn't get into the walk in detail. We talked a lot about inner work.
We might
But
have to
one,
have you back on to
yeah.
talk about the walk.
But one thing that came out of the walk was this faith in humanity that I already had, surprisingly enough. I know a lot of people that walk through trauma that I walk through don't necessarily have faith in humanity, but I was blessed and lucky enough to just come out the other side with a tremendous amount of faith in humanity. And a lot of that had to do with, I think, Lisa and Paul stepping into our lives and being there when my parents couldn't be, but also my relationships with other people from Massachusetts to Maine, and how, I don't know, I just felt very well supported through life. And I really did feel like there was good in everybody. And that was really apparent to me in walking across the country, no matter where we were. And we went to the deep South, and you know what people from the Northeast think about people in the deep South. Not all bad things, but you know, we all have we all stereotype it in a little way. But people obviously think there's a lot of racism in the South, and I didn't experience any of that as a black man. And wherever we were, like, people were just generous, and they opened their homes to us, their arms to us, like supported us in our journey of trying to do good across the country. And I want to put that in a message and bring it back across the country. And people can find me at nickrtucker.com.
And I'll put that
That
in the
is,
show notes. Yep.
yep, that's my speaking website. And if you like the occasional inspirational posts spattered in there amongst like baby and kid posts, you can follow me on Instagram, which is at Nick R. Tucker.
I will put both your website and your Instagram in the show notes. Well, Nick, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I'm really, really pleased with just hearing your story, knowing the work that you've done, and thrilled that our paths crossed all those years ago,
Yeah.
serendipitously, if that's the word. And I really am looking forward to keep, continuing following your story.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Well, good.
I don't have many adult conversations in my life outside of my wife, between running camp and speaking to mostly kids and then having kids. That's most of my interaction.
That's great. Well, I'm happy that we could have this adult conversation. Be well, take care. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We will be back next week for more.
All right. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.